The cowboy found two Apache girls bound in the desert. What one whispered made him freeze. The sun hung low in the wide sky, painting the desert in soft gold and long shadows. The cowboy rode slowly, letting his horse choose the path across the dry land. The wind moved like a quiet breath over the sand, carrying the smell of dust and warm stone. This land was familiar to him. He had crossed it many times, alone with his thoughts, guided by the stars at night and the sun by day. Still, today felt different. There was a strange stillness in the air, as if the desert itself was waiting for something to happen. His horse lifted its head and gave a low sound, ears turning toward the open space ahead. The cowboy followed the animal's gaze. At first he saw only rolling sand and scattered rocks. Then he heard it, a faint sound, soft and almost lost in the wind. He slowed his horse and listened. The sound came again, like a weak call that did not want to be heard, but needed to be. He slid down from the saddle and led the horse forward on foot, careful not to make noise. The land dipped into a shallow dry wash where old water lines cut through the sand. The cowboy walked down into it, eyes scanning every shadow and stone. The sound grew clearer now, and his heart began to beat faster. He rounded a bend in the wash and froze. There, in the shade of a tall rock, were two young Apache girls. They sat close together, tired and dusty, their faces marked by heat and fear. They looked up when they saw him, their eyes wide and unsure. The cowboy moved slowly, keeping his hands open so they could see he meant no harm. He spoke in a calm and gentle voice, even though his chest felt tight. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small canteen. He held it out, stopping a few steps away. One of the girls reached for it with shaking hands. He waited until she took a sip and then passed it to the other. They drank carefully, as if afraid the water might disappear. He took off his hat and used it to fan them, creating a small breeze in the hot air. The horse stood nearby, quiet and still, as if it understood the moment. The cowboy looked around the wash, searching for signs of others. He saw tracks in the sand, not fresh, but not too old either. His eyes followed them until they disappeared into the open desert. The girls spoke softly to each other in their own language. The cowboy did not understand the words, but he understood the fear in their voices. He gently pointed to himself and said his name. Then he pointed to them, asking theirs. One of the girls hesitated, then spoke her name in a quiet voice. The other followed. The cowboy nodded, showing he heard and respected them. As he helped them to their feet, one of the girls leaned closer. Her voice was barely louder than the wind, but her words hit him like a sudden storm. She told him there were people moving across the desert, people who were not kind and not careful. She said they had seen smoke in the distance and heard voices in the night. She said the land did not feel safe anymore. The cowboy felt a chill run through him even in the heat. He looked out across the open land again. The desert was wide, and it could hide many things. He placed a steady hand on the horse's neck and thought quickly. He knew he could not leave the girls here. He also knew that moving across open land with them would not be easy. He lifted one girl onto the horse first, making sure she was steady. Then he helped the other up behind her. He took the reins and began to lead the horse toward a line of rocks in the distance, where he knew there was a small canyon that could offer shade and cover. Every step felt heavy with care. His eyes never stopped moving, checking the horizon, the ridges, the open space behind them. As they walked, the girls began to relax. Just a little. One of them held onto the saddle and looked around, taking in the wide sky and the slow-moving clouds. The other watched the cowboy, studying his face, as if trying to understand who he was and why he had come. The path to the canyon felt longer than it ever had before. The cowboy kept his pace steady, not wanting to tire the horse or the girls. When they reached the tall rock walls, the air felt cooler, and the sound of the wind softened. He guided them into a small shaded spot where the ground was flat and safe. He helped the girls down and gave them more water. Then he pulled out a small bundle of food from his bag. It was not much, but they accepted it with grateful hands. They sat together, sharing quiet words and small smiles. The cowboy sat a short distance away, keeping watch. The whisper from before stayed in his mind. He thought about the tracks in the sand and the smoke the girl had mentioned. He had lived long enough on this land to know when something was not right. The desert was honest in its own way. It showed you what it wanted to show. But it also kept secrets. As the sun began to sink lower, the light turned soft and orange, filling the canyon with warm color. The girls spoke more now, using simple words and gestures. They told him about their home, a camp near a river where their family waited. They talked about the songs their mother sang at night and the stories their elders shared around the fire. Their voices grew stronger as they spoke, as if remembering these things gave them courage. The cowboy listened, nodding and smiling when he could. He felt a deep respect for their strength. They had been through fear and heat and long hours alone, yet they still spoke of home and hope. He realized that this journey was no longer just a ride across the desert. It was a promise he had made without words. As night came, he built a small fire, keeping it low so it would not be seen from far away. The flames flickered against the canyon walls, creating dancing shadows. The girls sat close, warming their hands. The cowboy kept his back to the rock, eyes on the open path leading into the canyon. Every sound felt louder in the dark. A small stone rolling down a slope, the soft step of the horse shifting its weight, the distant call of a night bird. The cowboy stayed alert, but he also felt a calm settle in his heart. He was where he needed to be. The stars came out one by one, bright and clear in the wide sky above the canyon. The girls looked up, pointing at patterns they recognized. The cowboy pointed out a few he knew. For a moment, the desert did not feel like a place of danger. It felt like a shared home under the same sky. Before the fire burned low, one of the girls spoke again. She thanked him in a simple way, her words careful and sincere. The cowboy tipped his hat and told her he was just doing what anyone should do. But inside, he knew this moment would stay with him. As the night grew quiet, the girls rested, wrapped in the cowboy's spare blanket. He stayed awake, watching the stars and the dark path beyond the canyon. The whisper, the tracks, the wide-open land, all of it formed a picture in his mind. Tomorrow would bring choices and challenges. But for now, in this small place of light and shadow, there was safety. The desert wind moved gently through the canyon, carrying the promise of a new day. The cowboy took a deep breath and held it for a moment, feeling the weight of what lay ahead and the strength he had found in two quiet voices and a simple act of kindness. The first light of morning touched the canyon walls with a soft pink glow. The cowboy opened his eyes and sat up slowly. The fire from the night before was only a circle of gray ash now. The horse stood nearby, calm and steady, chewing on a small patch of dry grass that had somehow grown between the rocks. The air was cool, and for a moment everything felt peaceful. The two girls were still asleep, wrapped in the blanket. Their faces looked calmer than they had the day before. The cowboy felt a quiet sense of relief, seeing them rest without fear. He stood and stretched, listening to the sounds of the desert waking up. A bird called from somewhere high on the rocks. The wind whispered through the narrow space of the canyon. He knew they could not stay here long. The sun would rise higher, and the heat would return. He also knew that if there truly were people moving across the land, staying in one place for too long could be risky. He gently woke the girls with a soft voice and a small wave of his hand. They sat up slowly, blinking in the light. He gave them water again and shared the last of his food. They ate quietly, saving small pieces for later. One of the girls pointed toward the east and spoke the name of the river near their home. The cowboy nodded. He had heard of it. It was not close, but it was reachable if they moved carefully and rested when they could. He helped them onto the horse again, making sure they were steady and comfortable. Then he took the reins and started forward, leading them out of the canyon and back into the open land. The desert stretched wide in front of them, glowing under the rising sun. As they walked, the cowboy kept his eyes on the ground, as much as on the horizon. He looked for tracks, broken plants, or any sign that someone else had passed through. The girls noticed his careful steps and began to do the same. When he stepped around a loose stone, they watched and copied. When he paused to listen, they grew quiet too. After some time, one of the girls spoke. She pointed to a low hill in the distance and said they had hidden there once before. The cowboy guided the horse in that direction. When they reached the hill, he found a small space behind it where the wind was blocked and the ground was cooler. They rested there for a short while. The cowboy used a small stick to draw shapes in the sand. He drew a simple line for the path they had taken, and another for the river they were heading toward. The girls leaned close, watching carefully. They pointed to a spot on the drawing and added their own marks, showing where they thought people had been seen before. This simple map made the danger feel more real. The cowboy felt the weight of the journey press on him. Still, he did not show fear. He smiled and gave him a small nod, letting them know they were not alone in this. They moved on again, following a path that kept them near rocks and low ground instead of open flat land. The sun climbed higher, and the heat grew stronger. The cowboy slowed his pace so the girls and the horse would not tire too quickly. He offered water often, even when they said they were fine. At one point, they came across an old camp spot. The fire pit was cold, and the ground was scattered with small bits of cloth and empty containers. The cowboy's face grew serious. This place had not been used long ago. The girls held on to each other, their eyes moving quickly across the area. The cowboy raised a hand, signaling them to stay still. He listened. The desert was quiet, but not empty. There was a feeling in the air that made him uneasy. After a long moment, he decided to move on, choosing a path that curved away from the camp. As they walked, the girls began to talk more about their home. They described the sound of water flowing over stones and the way the trees bent in the wind near the river. They spoke about a small dog that followed them everywhere and an elder who told stories about the stars. These words painted pictures in the cowboy's mind, giving him something bright to hold on to. The journey grew harder as the land became rocky. The horse had to step carefully, and the cowboy sometimes helped the girls down so they could walk for a while. They held on to the rocks and each other, laughing softly when one of them slipped and caught herself just in time. Even in the middle of a difficult path, they found small moments of light. By the time the sun reached its highest point, they found a narrow space between two tall rocks where there was shade. The cowboy guided them into it and let everyone rest. The air there was cooler, and a small trickle of water ran over stones nearby. It was not enough to drink, but the sound alone felt calming. The cowboy filled the canteen with what little clean water he could gather. The girls dipped their hands into the stream and wiped their faces. For a moment, the journey felt less heavy. While they rested, the cowboy told them simple stories about his life on the road. He spoke about the towns he had seen, the people he had met, and the long nights under open skies. The girls listened closely, asking small questions and smiling at his answers. Then one of the girls grew quiet. She looked out toward the open land again and said she felt like they were being watched. The cowboy did not brush this off. He stood slowly and scanned the horizon. He saw nothing moving, but he trusted her feeling. He decided it was time to move again. They left the shaded spot and followed a path that led through a series of low ridges. The land there was broken and uneven, making it harder to see from far away. As they moved, the wind picked up, blowing sand across their path. The sky grew pale and hazy. The cowboy wrapped a cloth around his face and gave one to each girl. They held on to the horse and each other, moving step by step through the blowing sand. When the wind finally eased, the land felt quiet again. The cowboy led them to a small rise where they could see far into the distance. From there, he spotted a faint line of green far away. It was not much, but it could mean water and trees. The girls saw it too, and their faces brightened. One of them clapped her hands softly. The cowboy felt a small sense of hope rise in his chest. As the sun began to lower, they reached a flat area where the ground was smooth and easy to walk on. The cowboy decided to stop for the night. He found a spot near a group of rocks and set up another small, low fire. They shared the last of the food and water, saving just enough for the morning. The girls spoke quietly about how close they felt to home now. The cowboy listened, feeling both hopeful and careful. He knew the last part of any journey could be just as hard as the first. The stars came out again, bright and steady. The desert cooled, and the wind softened. The cowboy sat near the fire, watching the path they had taken and the path ahead. Before they lay down to rest, one of the girls reached into a small pouch and pulled out a simple string bracelet. She held it out to the cowboy. He was surprised and tried to refuse, but she smiled and gently placed it in his hand. He tied it around his wrist, feeling a quiet warmth in the simple gift. As they settled down for the night, the cowboy looked up at the stars and thought about how far they had come in just one day. The whisper from the first meeting still echoed in his mind, but now it was joined by laughter, stories, and small signs of trust. Tomorrow would bring them closer to the river and, hopefully, to safety. The cowboy took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill his lungs. He closed his eyes for a moment, holding on to the promise of the green line in the distance and the quiet bond that had formed between three travelers under the wide desert sky. The morning air felt cool and fresh when the cowboy opened his eyes. The stars were fading, and a soft gray light filled the sky. The small fire from the night before had turned into a circle of ash. The horse stood quietly nearby, its head low and calm. The desert seemed peaceful, but the cowboy knew peace here could change in a moment. The girls were still resting, wrapped in the blanket. Their faces looked tired but hopeful. The cowboy sat for a while, listening to the gentle wind move across the rocks. He felt grateful for the quiet start to the day. He also felt the weight of what still lay ahead. When the girls woke, he greeted them with a small smile and handed them water. They drank slowly, careful not to waste a single drop. The cowboy packed his bag, checking everything twice. He tied the canteen to his saddle and made sure the blanket was secure. They began their journey again as the sun rose higher. The land changed little by little. The sand gave way to patches of dry grass and small shrubs. The air felt cooler here, and the smell of plants mixed with the warm earth. The cowboy pointed toward the faint green line in the distance. The girls nodded. They knew it meant water and trees. Maybe even the river they had spoken about. Their steps grew lighter as hope pulled them forward. As they walked, the cowboy showed them how to move quietly. He placed his feet carefully, avoiding loose stones. He taught them to walk in each other's footsteps to leave fewer marks behind. The girls tried their best, watching his movements and copying them. Sometimes they laughed softly when one of them stepped too loudly, but they quickly grew serious again. They reached a narrow path between two low hills. The cowboy raised his hand, signaling them to stop. He listened closely. The wind moved through the grass, making a soft rustling sound. For a moment, it felt like the land itself was speaking. The cowboy motioned for them to move slowly. They walked through the path, staying close to the rocks. On the other side, they found a small open area where a few tall trees stood. Their leaves moved gently in the breeze. The shade felt like a gift. They rested there, sitting on smooth stones. The cowboy checked the ground and found damp soil near the base of one tree. He dug carefully with his hands until a small pool of water formed. It was not much, but it was clean and cool. The girls smiled when they saw it. They took turns drinking and filling the canteen. The cowboy felt a small sense of relief. Water meant strength, and strength meant they could keep going. While they rested, the girls talked about their family again. They spoke of their mother's cooking and their father's quiet songs at night. They described the way the river sounded when it moved over stones and how they used to race each other along the bank. Their words painted a warm picture in the cowboy's mind. He shared a few stories of his own. He talked about a small town where people gathered every week to play music in the open square. He spoke of a kind shop owner who always gave him an extra piece of bread when he passed through. The girls listened closely, smiling at the idea of a place filled with music and laughter. After a short rest, they moved on. The land grew greener as they walked. Small birds flew from tree to tree, and the air felt cooler. The cowboy felt hopeful, but he stayed careful. He knew that being close to water often meant being close to others too. They came across a narrow trail that followed the shape of the land. The cowboy studied it closely. The marks in the dirt showed that people had passed this way not long ago. The girls grew quiet, holding on to each other. The cowboy chose a path that led away from the trail. It was longer, but it kept them hidden. They moved through tall grass and low bushes, staying low and quiet. As the sun climbed higher, clouds began to gather in the sky. The air felt heavy, and a distant sound of thunder rolled across the land. The girls looked up, unsure. The cowboy told them it might bring rain, which could help them, but it could also make the ground muddy and slow. They reached a rocky area where large stones formed natural walls. The cowboy decided it was a good place to wait out the weather. They sat under a wide stone ledge as the first drops of rain fell. The rain started softly, then grew stronger. The sound filled the space around them, washing away the dust and heat. The girls laughed quietly as cool drops touched their hands. The cowboy smiled, feeling the relief in the air. When the rain slowed, the land looked fresh and clean. Small streams of water ran between the rocks. The cowboy filled the canteen again, grateful for the gift from the sky. They continued their journey, stepping carefully on the wet ground. The smell of rain and earth filled the air. The girls walked more confidently now, their steps sure and steady. As the day went on, they heard a sound in the distance. It was not the wind or a bird. It was a low hum, like voices carried far away. The cowboy stopped and raised his hand. The girls froze. They moved slowly toward a cluster of trees and hid behind the trunks. The cowboy peeked through the leaves. He saw nothing, but the sound grew closer, then faded away. They waited for a long time, barely moving. The cowboy's heart beat fast, but he kept his face calm. Finally, the sound disappeared. The desert returned to its quiet state. They continued, staying close to cover. The green line in the distance grew clearer. They could now see the shape of trees and the shine of water reflecting the light. The girls pointed excitedly, whispering to each other. The cowboy felt a strong sense of hope. They were getting closer. As the sun began to lower, they reached a wide field near the edge of the river area. Tall grass moved in the wind, and the sound of flowing water filled the air. The girls' faces lit up. They knew this place. The cowboy felt relief wash over him, but he also felt careful. The open field left them visible. It guided them along the edge, using the trees as cover. They found a small spot near the water where the ground was soft and shaded. The cowboy decided it was a good place to rest for the night. He built a small fire, keeping it low and hidden behind rocks. They shared food and water, laughing softly as they talked about the journey. The girls told him how brave they thought he was. The cowboy shook his head and said they were the brave ones for never giving up. The river flowed quietly beside them, its steady sound calming and warm. The stars came out again, reflecting in the water like tiny lights. One of the girls asked the cowboy if he would stay until they reached their family. He nodded without hesitation. He had come this far, and he would not turn back now. As they lay down to rest, the cowboy looked up at the sky. He felt tired, but his heart felt full. The desert had tested them, but it had also brought them together. The whisper from the first day no longer felt like a warning alone. It felt like a beginning of trust, of shared strength, and of a journey that had changed all of them. The river's sound carried them into sleep, a gentle promise of safety and home just beyond the next bend in the land. The sky began to brighten with the soft gold of morning, spilling light over the river and the surrounding trees. The cowboy stirred first, careful not to wake the girls who were still resting. The river flowed gently beside them, reflecting the sunlight like a ribbon of silver. The air smelled fresh and clean after the night rain, carrying the scent of damp earth and new growth. For a moment the cowboy paused, listening to the soft sounds around him, the water moving, birds calling, and the whisper of wind through the leaves. It was peaceful here, but he knew their journey was not yet over. The girls woke shortly after, blinking at the light and the soft movement of the trees. They stretched and rubbed their eyes, smiling faintly at the sight of the river. The cowboy handed them water and a small piece of bread each. They ate slowly, savoring the quiet moment of safety. The cowboy watched them carefully, noting their energy and health. They had traveled far and endured much, but their spirits seemed strong. Once they were ready, the cowboy helped the girls onto the horse. One climbed first, holding tightly to the saddle. The other followed, their trust in him clear in the way they allowed him to guide them. He took the reins and led the horse along the edge of the river, keeping the water to one side and the trees to the other. The path was narrow and uneven, but he moved carefully, making sure the horse's steps were steady and the girls balanced. As they walked, the girls began to point out familiar landmarks. A particular bend in the river, a large oak tree with a split trunk, and a patch of wildflowers that grew only near their home. Their faces brightened with each recognition. The cowboy smiled softly to himself. This was the closest he had felt to seeing their destination, but he also knew that being so close could bring unexpected challenges. They approached a small clearing where the sun shone directly on the ground. The cowboy slowed, scanning the area. The clearing was wide and open, leaving them exposed. He guided the horse into the shade of a group of trees at the edge. From this vantage point, he could see across the field and into the forest beyond. The girls looked nervous. Sensing the openness, the cowboy knelt and spoke to them softly, explaining that they should move slowly and quietly through the open space. He showed them how to keep low and use the shadows of the trees for cover. The girls followed his instructions carefully, stepping in time with the horse and keeping their movements controlled. They reached the other side of the clearing without incident. The cowboy let out a quiet breath, feeling a small relief. They were still safe, but he knew they had to remain alert. The forest ahead was dense and could hide both help and danger. As they entered the forest, the air grew cooler and the light softer. The trees towered above, their leaves forming a protective canopy. The cowboy guided the horse along a narrow trail that twisted between trunks and over roots. The girls held on to the saddle and each other, moving carefully. The sound of their steps mixed with the rustling of leaves and the soft flow of a nearby stream. Suddenly, one of the girls paused, pointing toward a small open space ahead. The cowboy approached cautiously, peering through the trees. In the clearing, he saw signs of recent activity, footprints in the soft earth, a few broken branches, and a small pile of supplies. His eyes narrowed, and he motioned for the girls to stay back. He studied the area, listening for movement, but all he could hear was the wind and the distant sound of birds. After a tense moment, he decided to move quickly through the clearing. The horse stepped lightly, and the girls followed as instructed, keeping low. Once they reached the other side, the cowboy paused to check that nothing had followed. The girls breathed quietly, relieved to have passed the spot safely. They continued deeper into the forest, moving along the riverbank where the ground was soft and easier for the horse. The sound of the water was comforting, and the girls' spirits seemed to lift with each step. They began to talk quietly about their home, sharing memories of their family and the river where they had played. Their words painted a picture of a place full of warmth, laughter, and familiarity. The cowboy listened, feeling a growing sense of admiration for their resilience and courage. As the day wore on, they reached a wider part of the river where the trees opened up into a sunlit glade. The cowboy stopped and let the girls rest. They stepped down from the horse and stretched, laughing softly at the relief of solid ground beneath their feet. The cowboy filled the canteen from the river and offered it to them. They drank eagerly, their faces brightening with the cool water. While they rested, the cowboy surveyed the surrounding land. He noticed smoke rising from a distant point across the river. His heart tightened. This could mean other people were nearby. He decided they should move carefully, staying close to the river and using the trees for cover. He explained his plan to the girls, and they nodded, trusting his judgment without hesitation. They mounted the horse again and continued along the riverbank, moving quietly through the dappled sunlight. The cowboy taught the girls how to watch for shadows and listen for subtle sounds in the forest. Each step required concentration, and the girls followed his guidance with seriousness. The bond between them had grown stronger over the journey. They trusted him completely, and he felt a deep responsibility to keep them safe. Eventually, they reached a place where the trees thinned, and the riverbank opened into a wide, sunlit area. In the distance, they could see smoke curling from a small settlement. The girls' faces lit up with recognition. This was near their home. The cowboy felt a wave of relief, but he also knew the last part of the journey required caution. They had come so far, and danger could still be close. He guided them along a hidden path through the tall grass, keeping them out of sight. The girls whispered softly to each other, pointing to familiar landmarks and sharing quiet excitement. The cowboy smiled, feeling a mixture of hope and pride. They had endured the desert, the wind, and the forest together, and now the end of their journey was in sight. As they approached the settlement, the cowboy slowed the horse and let the girls dismount. They moved forward on foot, careful and quiet. The cowboy followed closely, scanning the area for any sign of trouble. The girls' home was just beyond the final grove of trees, and they could see their family waiting near the riverbank. Their faces lit up with joy, and they ran forward, calling out softly. The cowboy stayed back, allowing the reunion to happen. He watched as the girls embraced their family, tears of relief and happiness streaming down their faces. The family greeted him with gratitude, offering food, water, and a place to rest. The cowboy shook his head and smiled, saying he was just happy to help. As evening approached, the cowboy sat quietly by the river, watching the water flow and the family settle in for the night. He thought about the journey, the challenges they had faced, and the bond that had formed between him and the girls. He felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that his careful guidance and their trust had brought them safely home. The stars began to appear in the sky, reflecting on the river's surface. The air was cool, and the sounds of the night filled the forest. The cowboy leaned back, feeling the weight of the day and the journey behind him. He knew that this experience had changed him, just as it had changed the girls. The desert, the forest, and the river had tested their courage, but it had also shown them the strength that comes from trust, hope, and care. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the quiet of the evening sink in. Tomorrow would be another day, but for now they were safe, together, and the journey had reached a good ending. The cowboy felt a sense of peace as he watched the family reunite under the soft glow of the evening sky, knowing that even in the vast and sometimes dangerous world, kindness and courage could guide people home. The sky was painted with soft shades of orange and pink as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the fresh scent of river water and earth washed clean from the previous night's rain. The cowboy stirred from his sleep on the soft grass near the riverbank, careful not to wake the two girls or their family, who had fallen asleep nearby. He stretched slowly, feeling the stiffness from the long journey. But there was a deep satisfaction in his muscles, a quiet pride in what they had achieved together. The girls were awake a short while later, rubbing their eyes and smiling when they saw the first light of day. Their faces showed relief and joy, but also fatigue from the long and challenging journey. The cowboy handed them water and a small portion of bread he had saved from his bag. They drank slowly, savoring the taste of the cool morning water, their eyes bright with anticipation of the day ahead. The river beside them shimmered, reflecting the morning light like silver threads stretching across the land. The family stirred as well. The girls' parents and younger siblings had slept close to the river, and they now rose with smiles and soft words of thanks. The cowboy nodded respectfully to them, knowing that words could not fully express what had happened. His presence had been quiet but firm, a guiding hand that had brought their daughter safely home. The family offered him food, a small meal of bread, fruit, and dried meat, but he shook his head politely. He had eaten enough along the journey and felt content seeing the family reunited. After breakfast, the girls approached the cowboy, their faces serious but filled with gratitude. They spoke softly, describing their relief and happiness to be home. One of them held his hand gently and said a simple, heartfelt thank you, a gesture that touched him deeply. He nodded, looking into their eyes, silently acknowledging the courage they had shown and the trust they had placed in him. The cowboy knew the journey was over, but he also understood that this was a moment to teach and share wisdom. He spent the morning helping the girls and their family with simple tasks near the riverbank. He showed them a better way to gather water, how to inspect the land for small dangers, and how to move quietly and safely through open areas. Though they already knew much from experience, the small lessons reinforced their confidence and gave them new ways to stay safe. As the morning passed, the family guided the cowboy to their home, a small settlement nestled along the river. The girls ran ahead with laughter, their voices echoing through the open space. The cowboy followed more slowly, taking in the scene around him. The settlement was quiet but alive with the morning routine of families tending to animals, preparing meals, and beginning their day. Smoke rose from small chimneys, and the sound of children playing drifted through the air. The reunion with the extended family was emotional. Parents, grandparents, and siblings came forward to embrace the girls. Their tears of relief and joy reflected the deep bond of family and the immense gratitude for the cowboy who had guided them through danger. The cowboy remained quiet, standing back and observing, understanding that his role had been important, but that this moment belonged to the family. The girls told their family about the journey, carefully describing the desert, the forest, and the river they had crossed. They spoke of the fear and hope that had carried them through long days and nights. They shared how the cowboy had guided them, teaching them to be careful and showing them ways to navigate the land safely. The family listened closely, nodding with understanding, and praised the courage of the girls while expressing heartfelt thanks to the cowboy. After the initial excitement of the reunion, the cowboy and the girls walked to the edge of the settlement where the river curved gently. The river was calm here, flowing slowly over smooth stones. The girls pointed to familiar spots along the bank, places where they had played as children and learned the rhythms of the land. Their faces glowed with recognition and relief. The cowboy smiled, appreciating the beauty and simplicity of this peaceful place. He knew that soon he would have to leave. His work was done, and his own journey would continue elsewhere. But before he left, the girls wanted to show him something. A small tree they had planted near the river long ago. It was young but strong, its branches reaching toward the sunlight. They explained that it had been a symbol of hope for them, a small reminder that life could grow even in difficult times. The cowboy nodded, understanding the deeper meaning. He placed a hand on the tree, feeling its rough bark and imagining the years it would grow, just as the girls would continue to grow with courage and wisdom. As midday approached, the family gathered near the river to offer the cowboy a small farewell meal. The girl's mother handed him a wrapped bundle of bread and dried fruit, along with a simple note expressing gratitude. The cowboy accepted it with a humble nod, touched by the gesture. He had not expected recognition, but the thoughtfulness of the family warmed him. Before leaving, the girls and the cowboy walked a short distance along the riverbank. They spoke softly, sharing thoughts about the journey they had completed together. One of the girls looked up at him with a seriousness that belied her youth. She said that the desert had taught them many lessons, but the most important was the trust they had learned to place in someone who truly cared. The cowboy nodded, his heart full. He realized that their bond was lasting, and that the journey had left a permanent mark on all of them. The path ahead for the cowboy led back into the open land, toward the wide plains and the horizon beyond. He mounted his horse, feeling the familiar weight of the reins in his hands. The girls stood together, waving quietly as he prepared to ride away. Their faces were bright with smiles, a mix of relief, joy, and gratitude. The cowboy waved in return, tipping his hat respectfully. As he rode away, he looked back at the settlement, at the river glinting in the sunlight, and at the small figures of the girls running to their family. A sense of calm settled over him. The desert had tested them all, but it had also shown them the power of courage, trust, and simple acts of kindness. The whisper from the first day, once a warning of danger, now felt like the beginning of something far greater. A reminder that even in the vastness of the world, human connection could guide people safely through the unknown. The cowboy's path led him across the grasslands and hills, the wind moving through his hair and the smell of wildflowers filling the air. He reflected on the journey, thinking about the moments of fear, the moments of laughter, and the quiet courage of the girls. Each step of the way had been a lesson in patience, observation, and the strength of the human spirit. As the sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the land, the cowboy rode with a sense of purpose. He knew that the desert, the river, and the forest were all parts of a world that demanded respect, care, and attention. He felt grateful for the trust placed in him and for the opportunity to guide the girls safely home. By midday, he reached the edge of the open plains. The landscape stretched endlessly before him, filled with possibilities and unknown paths. He breathed deeply, feeling the warmth of the sun and the freedom of the open land. The journey with the girls had ended, but the lessons he had learned would remain. He understood now that even in the most isolated places, courage, trust, and compassion could shine brightly. The cowboy rode steadily across the plains, leaving behind the river, the settlement, and the family he had helped. Yet in his mind he carried their faces, the laughter and words of the girls, and the memory of the journey that had tested all of them. Every hill, every tree, every stretch of river along the way had become a part of his story, just as he had become a part of theirs. As evening approached, the cowboy stopped atop a small rise, looking back toward the distant river. The sun dipped low, casting golden light across the land, and he felt a sense of closure. The journey had been long and full of challenges, but it had also been full of hope and connection. He tipped his hat toward the river and the settlement, a silent farewell and a quiet acknowledgment of the journey's end. The night came, and the stars shone brightly over the open plains. The cowboy camped beneath the vast sky, feeling the peace of a world that was wide yet safe for those who moved with care and trust. He reflected on the journey, realizing that courage was not just about facing danger. It was about protecting others, teaching them to trust, and guiding them to safety when they could not do it alone. As he drifted into sleep, he thought of the girls and their family, imagining them safe and happy, surrounded by the river, the trees, and the land they knew so well. He knew that the journey had changed all of them, and that this adventure would remain in their hearts forever. The desert, the river, and the forest had been witnesses to courage, trust, and the quiet power of simple kindness. The cowboy slept beneath the stars, a sense of fulfillment in his chest. The journey had ended, but the lessons would remain forever, a story of hope, bravery, and the human connection that could carry anyone safely through even the harshest lands. The whisper from the first day, once a warning, now felt like a promise. No matter how vast or uncertain the world might be, trust, care, and courage could always guide people home.